All right, Tuck, we are going to set up this rifle with its scope. We're going to mount the scope in the rings. We're going to do it step by step, talk about why we're doing what we're doing here. So first step is you got to pick the right scope for the job. Okay, in this case, we got here this NXS Night Force scope. We wanted a scope that was going to be lightweight. We already weighed this at 1 pound 5.4 with its scope caps, right? And 1 pound 4.5 ounces without. So bare scope, 20.5 ounces. Okay. We wanted a scope that's going to dial. 2.5 to 10 power is enough magnification. You guys have shot things out to I mean, I think you shot your elk last year with, I'm trying to think, that was with a 9 power scope.
Yeah.
At 360 yards. You know, we can reach out pretty far with a 10 power scope. This has got the illuminated reticle and the adjustable parallax, the focus, if you will. Yeah. We've got exposed windage. We can dial for the wind. It's got a second focal plane reticle, which only really matters if we weren't going to be dialing for windage at the max power, which we almost always, if we're dialing for windage, we're already zoomed into the max power, in which case the reticle will be accurate, right? So we picked our scope for our needs. That's a good scope. We've decided on the ring setup that we wanted. Okay, in this case, I would usually get the DNZ Game Reaper one piece. They're about 3 ounces. This one is the Mac Brothers Element Action, and other than a pick rail style mount, which would have been a couple and a half ounce heavier than this, they have this special one-piece ring that you can buy from Mac Brothers specifically for this action. The normal DNZ mounts, they don't have one that'll fit this yet. Maybe they will someday. We can save another half an ounce. But as it sits, we had to pick the one that was going to be the lightest weight for our needs and still be super durable, very robust, right? This actually feels probably like it'll be even more sturdy than the DNZ Game Reapers. And we've looked at and decided what our length of pole and our eye relief is going to need to be here. Now, we want the scope, in our case, to be as far back as we can get it, and that really limits us on this ring setup. We really only can go to about just right in front of this bell, where it's gonna, that's as far back as that scope can mount in these particular rings. There's other rings out there that would probably let it go a little bit further back, but for our purposes, we don't have any real adjustment range there. So we've already figured that out. We figured out where the placement of the scope's gonna need to be. What do you think is gonna be our next step here?
Probably cleaning the screws.
Okay, yeah, we're going to want to get the screws themselves clean. We're going to set this off to the side. So we've got the 8 screws, 4 for the base and 4 for the rings themselves, and we want to clean those. So we're going to take a little bit of solvent here. And we've already kind of pre-cleaned these a little bit. So we usually just take some of this solvent, spray it, a little puddle on the rings. And we can take, I like to just take the actual bit that I'm going to use in my torque wrench to actually just give me something to hold on to. But you can just grab onto one of those and dip it in a little bit in the solvent there. And then we'll get as much of that black off as we possibly can. So why do we get these clean?
So it doesn't come loose when it's on the scope. It doesn't.
Yeah, I mean, this is basically like oil. Oil is a lubricant, right? So theoretically, if you torque that down, it could eventually work its way loose. So we don't want that. We don't want that to happen. We want the scope set up to be as stable and sturdy and stand the test of time. You don't want the vibrations from shooting to in any way work that loose, so you have to find that screw. Okay, so like I said, we've already pre-cleaned these for the sake of time. This will probably take about 10 minutes if you're doing it right. If you're not already starting with pre-cleaned screws. So each of those are coming out clean on the rad. Now the next thing you need to clean is on the rings themselves. You've got the mounts where the ring screws are actually going to thread in. And for that, we're just going to see if we can't take same process. We'll just take a Q-tip, get a little bit of this solvent on there, running out. And you'll just kind of thread that in there. Get as much, a little bit of black coming off on that. We'll do that a couple of times. And as we get this cleaned up here, we can talk through what our next step is going to be. Now I will say one thing that is a little bit helpful here. You can just kind of take off some of the thickness of that Q-tip so that it goes in to the threads a little bit easier. You don't want to leave any excess little fuzzies in there if you can help it. Do that until I'm getting fairly clean Q-tip coming out. Get that manufacturing oil out of there. Now, if it's a set of rings that you've already used, you've already done this before, you know, you're going to clean out some of the gunk from maybe previous Loctite you've had in there, but you're really more looking to get the lubrication aspect of oil and grease out of there. So it won't be quite as imperative to get something that's intended to hold it fast out as much at a later time if we were redoing this for a different set of rings. Okay, so now we've got the action itself, which I've already pre-cleaned this. Bring this over here. I've already pre-cleaned these, but again, same principle. We're going to get into those screw points where the bases are going to be mounting. Now this one you want to be a little bit more careful because I don't want to get the solvent down inside where my barrel actually is threaded into, because there's oftentimes some sort of not a Loctite, but there's material that they've used to hold the barrel in place, and you wouldn't want that to dissolve or come out or in any way degrade the connection between the barrel and the action itself. But we don't want that grease in there either. This is going to let our rings work themselves, or that oil let our rings work themselves out a little bit. Just kind of keep that in mind. And really, we're only worrying about the area that's going to contact. So some of these can go in deeper, and you can get down into the threads of the barrel there. So we're getting clean connection on each of those. Okay, so we've got our rings are clean. our screws are clean, where our bases are going to go, our base screws are going to go in are clean. So let's get our mess tidied up a little bit, set those off to the side. What's going to be our next step? We want to make sure that our rifle is level here, which we've already done more or less. This is a lot easier done if you have some sort of a tripod that the rifle can actually rest on. So we've already got this more or less pre-leveled. I have some Loctite here on hand for find one that's not almost empty. Dab a Loctite in there. Okay, so we've set our barrel level with the level of the rifle itself. So we want to kind of maintain that level throughout this process. Now we're going to double check that here. Our first step is we want to mount these rings. Okay, so this setup only can go one way. It's got a little like a recoil lug, if you will, a little pin that goes into a hole there, so it only can go into one spot. And I do not, so some rings have a little bit of play. This one is really nice in how it just really fits right there to this action. So I'm happy about how this is gonna go together here. But so make sure I've got the right screws for the right parts. I don't think, let's see if they are interchangeable, or we can mix them up. Well, I'm pretty sure those, the wider capped ones, are going to be for the ring, or the ring parts themselves. I believe that's how we had it. But then these kind of more shallower ones, I think is what we had for. Looks like they're both about the same length of actual threads. Although those do go in a little bit deeper, so. Let's just give it a quick, one way to kind of test whether a set of rings is going to bottom out is just put one ring in, or one screw in. Okay, that might be a different thread pattern now that I'm feeling that. Because that definitely, that goes in no problem. That goes in. It's just got this little bit of kind of a thread locker little piece on there. Well, I believe it was the shorter of the two, now that I think about it, that we had set up. Okay, so we're going to put all of our 4 screws that are going to line up I'm going to do them one at a time here and make sure that when they are tightened down, they each individually hold the rings actually to, there's no wobble or play. So you might have a screw that is a little bit too long for the particular action, you might have to shorten it or something. And if it's bottoming out and it's not allowing it to make full contact, you'd want to know that. So I'm loosening it back up each time so I can go down the line and screw in each screw independently. Did I miss a screw there? for some reason. Let's do that one real quick while we got it. So even just hand tight, I mean, there's no play. And that shows a good fit between my bases and the scope here, or and the rifle itself. I'll pull these out and figure out why I'm not getting contact with this middle one here. So some of this seems like it's a really tedious process, but the most likely place that is going to fail in your rifle system is going to be the scope, or the scope mounting system itself. And the most likely failure point for your scope system is how it's mounted. I might need a longer, let's see if that looks like about the same. Now I can test that one. Also gets a good secure point there. But for some reason I can't get my bit all the way in there. Okay, so we've checked that all of our base screws are not going to bottom out too soon, that they all are going to make good contact. And now we're going to put a little dab of Loctite on the bottom of each of those, and we can do it one of two ways. We can put just a little dab on the where the screw is going to go in, and then the screw will catch that as it goes down. In this case, that's probably going to be our simplest option. And we'll make sure to wipe off this excess. And we're done there. So I don't want to have, as much as possible, I don't want to have the Loctite coming up off to the sides where it'll get under in between the base and the action itself. Well, I don't know for sure if that will cause any issues, and it hasn't. I know I've pulled scopes apart that have had a little bit of residue that dried in between the scope and the rifle, and I haven't noticed any adverse movement or effects that way. It just seems like good practice to not have a bunch of extra residue running all over the place here. And there's some guys that will actually, they'll bed their scope rails. They'll actually use a permanent thread locker of some sort of a glue that will actually bind the base to the action so that they don't get any future movement. So this step is very, very important to making sure that once this is on here, we don't get movement between our scope and these rings. We don't want any movement down the line. Okay, so we've got our thread locker set up in there. We line that back up. And we're going to snug each of these down real quick. Now, probably doesn't matter a whole heck of a lot at this stage, but I'm going to go outer, outer, and then inside to inside, just for a consistent pattern. Kind of a similar principle to doing the lug nuts on your car, I would guess. So you get consistent torque between each. That's the one that's just not catching for some reason. I guess it did. I'm just not feeling it. This one catches, but that one doesn't. Interesting. Okay, so we're to this point. We want to grab our inch-pound torque wrench. Okay, so a lot of manufacturers will list the torque settings for the mounts, from mounting the bases to the rings, or the bases to the action, and then the ring specs actually clamping down on the scope itself. So, for example, the D&Z ones that we're usually doing, I got my little paper here, I've written down the notes. Let's see, 30 inch-pounds for our bases, and 30 to 35 inch-pounds for the rings themselves. Now, I think Talley in their specs is usually around 20 or 25. I think we're going to do 30 and 35. Now, there isn't anything published on the Mac Brothers website about torque specs. The thing you'd usually kind of have to consider is, if you've got a really cheap scope that, it's more likely to be bent or marred if you put too much torque on it. I mean, heavier duty scopes like this Night Force are definitely going to be able to withstand more torque, but more torque means less likely to move. Heavier duty steel action is going to be able to withstand more torque than like an aluminum action. Okay, so we're gonna do this at 30. I do have an email out to Mac Brothers, see if they answer that. If it comes out, that I'm wrong in this estimation of 30 inch-pounds, then we can back it off. Okay, so I've got this. So the way you set this is, you got a little dial that pull this knob out, and you can set it to the corresponding. I put the red line in the middle of the hash mark for the 30 inch-pounds. Okay. That's where I'm going to put mine there. So the challenge is going to be, this is going to want to be in the way. Okay, so I'm not going to crank it all the way down. I'm going to do a little bit at a time. Again, kind of the principle of torquing your car. And so that's not going to let me do that. So on these inside ones, we're going to have to kind of feel it. Now, in the D&Z instructions, which has a very complete instructions for how they like you to do it, they say that you're putting pressure with the long end of the handle until it doesn't want to go, and you're holding that for 5 or 10 seconds. So we'll do something similar. I think I could go just a tad heavier there, but kind of hold into that. Now we're going to crank this down on these end ones a little bit more. This time I'm going to go all the way until it clicks. So I know I got to my 30 inch-pounds when it clicks. these inside ones just a little bit. Try and match the amount of pressure I felt like I was putting on the torque wrench itself, which probably isn't the worst way to go about it. The torque wrench definitely is, I would dare say it is a necessity if you really want to be precise about this kind of thing, but you can work around without having the torque wrench itself. So one more swing, just see if I can get that in there, but I don't think it's going to catch. No, it's not going to catch that. Okay, so we've got our bases set here. Now that gives us a flat surface to double check our level. We were leveling off of this front piece, which this handguard might just be off just a hair, but we're going to use this level surface here as our final leveling point. You want to avoid, if your table has some movement, to avoid touching your table here. And I want to keep it level front to back as well, because that'll adjust the bubble. So you're going to tell I'm just a little bit off there. So this sometimes is a little bit of a back and forth to try and get it just to the right spot. Because why is it important, Tucker, to have the scope level to the rifle? Remember?
So it's like when how this bullet flies, it's kind of a curve. You want the scope's curve to follow that curve.
Well, I guess you're really lining it up. I'm gonna grab that wrench for me that fell over there. But yes, more or less, if you want to be accurate at longer range, okay, so we're lined up on the bubble there. Now we got to line up the bubble. Oh, let's just stop moving the. Scoot this way a little bit. Okay, so we can finish lining up the bubble on our muzzle there. Okay, so now when we actually crank this down, this is representative of a level rifle, so we can put this bubble level on the scope itself. Okay, would you say that? Would you agree that's level and that's level?
Yeah.
Okay, so that's it. We're not going to touch that anymore. So even if we bump this rifle, we can go back to and re-level that. Double check one more time. That's pretty darn close from the front to back level. Okay, so getting towards the end of our process here. Okay, so now we've got our scope. We know where in the rings it needs to go as far as deciding front to back. Now, where possible, I like to have the scope as low as I can get it. In this case, again, with the ring options, which are fairly limited for this particular action, we don't have a lot of choices. This is the lowest we had to choose from, and it's, it's a little higher than I would prefer, but I can adjust that with my cheek riser on my stock. I can still get a good cheek weld doing that. Okay, so now I got my level back here, and I can put that on the top of the scope, and I can level the scope to the rifle. Make sure that I haven't bumped the front level. Now, I will say that it's, I would say, always the best practice to make sure that the reticle itself is level to the outer dimensions of the scope. It's plausible that the reticle could be slightly canted inside the scope itself. And so what we'll check after this is we'll put a string line, basically use a plumb bob to make, use gravity to make us a perfectly vertical line, and we can line up the scope with our level still attached and verify that the reticle is lining up with the scope itself, with the outer dimensions of the scope. So ultimately, that's what we're going for. We want to have this be, we want that reticle level with the rifle as we've got it leveled here. So, okay, so now we've got our ring screws that we need to mount, and then we'll have just one more step and then we'll be done. So I'm going to put just a little dab of this Loctite on each of these. I'm not going to screw that in all the way quite yet until we get them all kind of set in their particular spots. Now make sure you don't cross thread these, so make sure they're going in nice and smooth. You're not feeling resistance.
I think you bumped the scope itself now.
Yep. So that will be our next check. That is one thing, depending on the style of ring screws, as you torque the caps down, it will move the scope as it kind of puts pressure on the scope. It'll kind of move it a little bit. And so you have to kind of play with that to get the right alignment. But I'll point out, this is a tedious process. To do this right, this is 30 minutes, start to finish, maybe 45. Okay, so we've got Loctite on each of those. I'm going to back the screws out just a little bit so I can move the scope, get it back to where it was level. I'm looking at my level there. Looks like I bumped that just a hair. Okay, so I want to be able to move the scope in the rings. Back to where it's level. Lined up there, move that back a little bit. That look level to you?
Yep.
Now, you gotta be really, there's level and then there's level. We want level.
Yeah, it's level.
Okay, so we've got this. Does that look equally centered? That bubble looks like maybe we can go just a hair that way. Move that. See, every time I move that, it moves that just a hair. Okay, so those both look like they're lining up. So let's put one screw and torque it down just a little bit here and see if it's going to move. Scope, actually let's do the two end ones, see if it moves. The scope is lining, or the bubble is lining up. Once we put a little bit of pressure on the scope itself. See, it moved it just a tad. So we go back it. Sometimes you kind of have to game it, knowing it's wanting to force it this direction in our case. When the pressure kind of gets put on it, let's see if we can put it that way a little bit to begin with and see if it kind of tightens it into the level position. All right, so I'm going to swap back to my torque wrench here. And it's doing the same thing, so we need to go even a little bit further. Okay, so we're gonna crank those down, see if we're still on target. It's looking like we've got it lined up where we want it. A little bit of torque for each of them. Oh, and it went past again. That last little bit, it just keeps wanting to push it just a hair beyond center, a hair beyond level. But you know, this is good. This is important to see this because it really is how it's gonna happen about half the time. You're gonna have a scope that just does not want to line up perfectly. But you want it to line up perfectly, so you got to take the time to make it fit. Don't get in a rush. Don't skip steps, because once this is set on here, we want this set for good. We want it set, and we don't want to have to pull it apart or troubleshoot something related to the scope and have to wonder if our mounting job wasn't done properly. I dare say we hit that one on the money. Why don't you double check me here? How's that look? That's level and that's level, correct?
Yep.
And we got our 30 foot-pounds clicks. We're lined up front to back. So we are done with that part. Okay, so last but not least, we can set this, we can turn this around now. We should have had this facing us the whole time, would have been a lot easier. So now I like to take a little bit of fingernail polish, and the lid came off. And we're going to make ourselves a witness mark on these rings. Just a little teeny dab. on the edge of these screws so I can see later if the screws themselves had worked loose. Because that fingernail polish will harden, and it will, if it breaks, if those screws break free of that, you'll see that you'll see where the fingernail polish had lined up, and you'll see where it is now, and you can say, oh, we got a problem. We've got to address that. So the other spot that I'll do this is just on the side of where the bases meet. The action. Same principle, if the base